Hi, everyone, and welcome to And Action. This is episode 18. We're going to be talking about a movie called The Opposite Sex, or is it called A Bet's a Bet? It's actually called both. This is one of those movies that has two names. We're going to get into all that and more. But first, let me introduce my fearless co host, Mike. How the hell are you, buddy? It's a new week. It's great to see you. What's new?
Hey, Tommy, I'm glad to be here and looking forward to this episode. I've seen this movie, as you know, and did some nice interviews with yourself and some of the other key players at the time of the in-house premiere, I guess you'd call it. So glad to be here talking about the opposite sex.
Yeah, it's funny to think back to a movie that we made back in this one came out in 2014 and we shot it back in 2013. So we're going to get into all that and more, but first let's check in. We got some of our regular watchers with us. Stephen E, what's happening, brother? Good to see you on the show again. A couple of things we wanted to talk about. Great feedback on last week's episode. We really had a great time talking about social media, and I think everybody got a little something out of that. Social media is definitely one of those crazy enigmas, one of those kind of puzzles, and we're always trying to figure out how to navigate it. And I think we learned that the best thing to do is just kind of be yourself, and don't be afraid to keep those promotions rolling. So if you haven't seen that, go back and check out episode 17 about social media. If you haven't given us a subscribe yet, hit that subscribe button, and we'll get right into it. But before we start our show, I just want to talk about we made an announcement earlier about some sponsorship opportunities. Mike and I have been doing the show now consistently for a little while. This is episode 18, and we're ready to kind of take our level of seriousness up a notch, and we're looking to get some sponsors. So, a sponsorship is something that's available. We have multiple packages to choose from. If you know anybody who might be interested, someone who might want to, get on board and advertise an event, just a one-shot sponsorship kind of deal, we can do that. There's a deal in place. If you want to do multiple weeks, we can offer you a better rate. So if you're looking for more info on that, feel free to drop down a comment and I'll either email you or shoot you a message. But we are looking for sponsors. But now that we got that little bit of business out of the way, Mike,
Hmm.
let's set our time machines for the summer of 2013 when we were about to embark on the production of, at the time, a movie called A Bet's a Bet. Real quick, why don't we do the old? This is kind of something important, I think, to do if you haven't seen the movie yet. I'm sure some of our listeners, viewers, haven't seen it yet. We're just going to read the kind of quick synopsis of the film here. The Opposite Sex, also known as A Bet's a Bet. A Bet's a Bet tells the story of Vince, New England's most successful divorce attorney. To Vince, life is one big competition, and losing is unacceptable. This also applies in his dating life with his love him and leave him approach. Then Vince meets Jane, who is beautiful, successful, and extremely driven. Together, they enter into a series of entertaining wagers with each other, where the winner gets to decide the fate of the loser. After all, a bet's a bet. So this is a cute kind of premise here where these two potential lovers kind of get together and basically almost kind of play a string of games, if you will, with kind of the winner getting the advantage on, okay, well, you have to go on this date with me if I win, and you have to do this if I lose. If I lose, I'll do that. So it's very cute stuff. I think it's one of those, as they say, it falls under the romantic comedy, the old rom com category, which I feel like, this was sort of towards the tail end of the rom-com boom. When I
Right.
was a kid, especially like in the 90s, I feel like, the late 90s, early 2000s was like a goddamn hotbed for romantic comedy. I mean, it
Renee
seemed like
Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey and Look at My Stepmother or
yeah, it
something.
seemed
Yeah.
like Matthew McConaughey was always getting involved in some kind of relationship antics. Jennifer
Jennifer
Aniston
Aniston.
was
Yeah.
very popular in that space. Guys, you know what? I'm gonna do something very freeing. I'm shutting my damn phone off. I don't even want to hear it for the rest of the show.
Good, brother.
Shut off. Shut off. That's it. If I have to call the fire department, I'm just gonna run out the window because there's no helping us at this point. As Kim Kaling checks in, what's up, Kim? I had the pleasure of meeting Kim in person over the
Oh, very
weekend
good.
at an event for Eric Lutz, who we know Eric Lutz is a terrific actor. We worked with him many times. Eric Lutz, happy birthday to you, brother. It was actually a Gilligan's Island party, Mike. Not to
Did
go
you
on a
go?
rabbit hole.
Sure.
Go ahead, buddy. Go ahead.
Did you go as the professor or Gilligan, or those seem to be in your wheelhouse, perhaps?
You know, Mike, it's an interesting social experiment to go to
Yeah.
a party and to kinda see who chooses what costume.
Right.
Because if you think about it, it's like, it says a lot about who you are, I mean, you've
Sure.
got a lot of characters. You've got Mr. Howell, he's the eccentric millionaire. You've got, Lovey, his wife, who actually, if you know your history of Gilligan's Island, she had all the dough. And then there's Gilligan, who's lovable. There's the skipper, who's, in charge of the whole gang, so it's kinda like, you might be a little bit of a control freak if you wanna be the skipper. The professor's obviously one of the only normal motherfuckers on the island. And he's a handsome fella. So, everybody liked the professor. You got Ginger, the movie star. You got Mary Ann, the girl everyone loves. So there's a lot of interesting social. Uh, it's this big social dichotomy when you see who chooses what. I chose
Right.
the professor
Yeah.
because it's the easiest goddamn costume to get together. I put on a
Sure.
blue button-down shirt. I had a pair of khaki pants and I had a belt and some shoes, and I was good to go. So needless to say, we had a blast at the Gilligan's Island party. So Kim Kalen's good to see you. Steven, you're right. Marianne she was normal too. She was the girl next door. Everybody loved Marianne. My dad tells me that literally everyone in the night from 1965 to 1970 had a massive crush on Marianne. So shout out to Gilligan's Island. Now let's get back on track. Let's talk about the opposite sex, aka a bet's a bet. So yeah,
Let
we
me ask
talked
you
about.
this
Go ahead,
question.
Mike.
If I ask you a question, Tom, just in general, maybe not the specifics of this exact scenario, but why would a movie have two titles, or why would a movie change titles? Do you have any insights for us
Oh, I
on
have
that?
not only insights, brother, but I know exactly why that happened. So basically, the movie was brought to the table by a producer by the name of Gino Pereira. And Gino's a terrific guy and actually helped produce a lot of my early movies, movies like Self Storage. Gino was involved in that, Army of the Damned. I believe even to a degree, he helped out on Almost Mercy. So Gino's a really kind of what in my early formidable years of filmmaking, Gino was kind of one of the producing partners of Chad Verdi, and he was very instrumental in bringing this movie to the table. At the time, we got to go back to this is probably when I first heard about this movie. It was called A Bet's a Bet, and it was a script that was brought to the table by Gino and presented to Chad Verdi as, "Hey, here's this project that we could do. It's not like a lot of the other projects that you've made." At the time, Chad had made Incubus, and he had made, Infected, and he had made a lot of horror movies. He did make a movie called Lucy's at the time, but for the most part, they were all horror movies except for Lucy's. So this was one of those movies that Chad could kind of get a little bit out of that horror genre. And I believe, from a dollars and cents standpoint, I think it already had a little bit of financing attached to it as well, which, always makes a project more enticing to get behind. So it was originally a bet's a bet. And I think what ended up happening was the name became a little clunky at first. People were saying a bet's a bet, and it didn't kind of roll off the tongue, but that wasn't even really the problem. I believe, and we're skipping way ahead now, because keep in mind, this movie was called A Bet's a Bet up until the very end. I mean, it wasn't until the movie just about got released that we knew it was called The Opposite Sex. But again, we're skipping ahead, but basically, the reason why they changed the name is it's as simple as this. They felt as though, and by they, I mean the distributors, felt as though having the word sex in the title of a romantic comedy would get more attention than having a phrase, a bet's a bet, that, what does that really mean? You know what I mean? Like when I read a bet's a bet, if I'm scrolling through a list of movies with my remote control at home and I see a bet's a bet, I don't really know that that's a romantic comedy right off the bat. It could be a gambling movie. Is this about card playing? Is it about poker players? What the hell's
Horse
going on?
racing. Yeah.
Horse racing. Whereas the opposite sex, I get it. It had a little bit more intrigue, and there might have been a little more like clickability to that title. So that's why they changed that name.
Okay.
So basically, this one came together very quickly. I remember I was just coming off of Army of the Damned, and we had shot Army of the Damned maybe a couple of months before gearing up for this film. And it was certainly a little bit bigger of a budget. It was probably a lot bit bigger of a budget than Army of the Damned, but we still ended up using a lot of the same kind of philosophies and a lot of the similar people that we used on Army of the Damned, and really just moved them over. That's something that
Right.
you'll see a lot of film production companies. They love to do that, and they try to do that because you always want to keep your crew base active. The more that you can keep your people working and working with you, they get better at their job. They become a little more, builds a little bit of a sense of loyalty, because it's like, hey, that we're going to call you again if something else comes up. So a lot of the crew was able to kind of just shift on over. And as I go through, it's fun looking at this cast, seeing a lot of familiar faces. We're going to get into that in a little bit. This one, now, Mike, I know that you're originally from Virginia, and you
Yes.
grew up as a fan of the Baltimore Orioles.
Yep. Cal Ripken Jr., Eddie Murray, not to be confused with Eddie Murphy.
Right.
But yeah, the Mike Mussina, all types of great players down there.
Because at the time, when you were a youngster, not to date you, but they didn't have the Washington Nationals, and that would have probably been the team closest to you.
Yeah, that was the 2000s. The Nationals came in at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, so as a youngster, Mike liked the Orioles. Well, this movie was written by probably one of the most famous Baltimore Orioles of all time, Mike Mussina. It was
No,
written
there
by
you go.
his brother. It's kind of funny. It was written by
Okay.
Mike Mussina's brother. So not Mike
That's-
Mussina, not the Hall of Fame pitcher, not the former Oriole, not the former New York Yankee. I believe he did win a World Series with the Yanks eventually. That was kind of the thing. Poor Mussina was this like stud pitcher for the Orioles for like 16 seasons, and they never won a goddamn thing. And then I think he went on to the Yankees and won a series. So Mike's brother, Mark, co-wrote this script with a guy by the name of Steve Sessions. And Mark was a funny guy. It was cool to work with him. For me, I'm a baseball fan, so it was fun just to kind of hear some stories about his brother. And yes, you can imagine, although this is by no means a baseball movie, there is a little nod to baseball. There's a little bit of a, baseball sequence, if you will.
right.
So pretty cool. This one was written by a Hall of Fame ball player's brother.
That's cool. I mean, it kind of shows maybe they were in a ways competitive. Each brother had their own strength growing up. Like each had a skill set or interests that are pretty different. One's in writing and one's in athletics, but you could make a case that they're both very successful. One's got a film made and one's got a World Series ring, so you can't beat that.
Yeah, definitely, had a lot going for him as a family. Just going to click some of these comments here. Stephen E says, I was in a film that had two titles. Yeah, it's always very confusing when you got two titles. We'll talk about some of the confusion that can cause later on. Sounds like an 80s film title to me. Stephen, not only does it sound like an 80s movie, but it was kind of written like an 80s movie. It definitely had like a throwback kind of vibe. We're going to talk about that a little bit too, just in terms of like styles of comedy and how, like anything else, comedy evolves over time. That's why one of the, I want to talk about A Bet's a Bet and the opposite sex, but really what I think what our viewers can get out of this, if you're a filmmaker, especially if you're a writer, we're going to talk about comedy a little bit later and why it's so fucking difficult. Like, out of all the genres to write, comedy is by far the most difficult genre to be universally successful with, meaning I can make everybody laugh with this. It's very difficult. Comedy is so pinpointed. And also, sometimes what people find funny in the United States here domestically, that shit ain't going to translate overseas. So
Right.
it's very difficult. It's hard to make that universal comedy that is beloved, that the universal comedy that everybody loves worldwide. That's not an easy thing to come up with, just because our sense of humors are very different from country to country, culture to culture. And also, times change, man. And sometimes, like, it's funny if you watch a movie, I've watched, not to go on a sidebar, but like, I watched a movie, I think it was Caddyshack with some of the younger guys that I work with, and like, I'm not gonna say they didn't think it was funny. I'm sure
Right.
they chuckled at some of the moments, but it was very apparent to me that the shit wasn't landing on them like it was landing on me. And it's kind of like I get it. Like if you didn't grow up in that era, or knowing some of the kind of references and things like that, well, the shit's just not going to be funny to you. And altogether, the style changes.
Well, a
Like
lot of it also, buddy, is appreciation of certain talents. Like a Rodney Dangerfield had a bunch of great comedies in the early '80s, and he was doing live stand-up comedy on HBO. He was on the Johnny Carson show, and he had this rapport with a lot of the people watching these films, like Easy Money and stuff like that. And Jackie Mason, the same thing. And if you take those guys who are kind of a different generation, and you show them to your 2022 16-year-old, they're going to have no frame of reference for this Rodney Dangerfield or Jackie Mason. They might for Chevy Chase or Bill Murray, but it's just we tend to like people that we're familiar with, and if you're not familiar with some of the cast, it's harder to get a chuckle out of you.
that's a great point, Mike. I mean, think about it. Like everyone loves Will Ferrell, right? And maybe he's even kind of getting no disrespect to Will Ferrell, but even maybe Will Ferrell is now a little long in the tooth in terms of like what's current. But I remember a period of time, maybe 10, 15 years ago, when Will Ferrell didn't have to do a goddamn thing to get a pop. Like he wouldn't
Right.
have to do anything. He could like move his eyebrow a certain way and everyone would just fucking laugh. And that's because, and again, I'm not taking anything away from him. That's the familiarity that he has. Like you said, like people just, they know him and they know he's funny. So they know that he's going to make them laugh. Whereas if a 16, 17, even a 22-year-old person watches Rodney Dangerfield, to them, it's just some old guy with bug eyes. They're like, what? I guess this guy's comical. But they didn't grow up with him. They didn't love him. They didn't just like, it ain't that home cooking to them. So
Right.
timing is everything when it comes to what's funny. Stephen E makes a good point. You got your different styles. This is an excellent point. We're going to get into this. And this is why, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves in terms of this. I wanted to talk about this towards the end of the show because we're going to discuss how some of these things affect A Bet's a Bet. But there are different types of comedy: slapstick. There's the Woody Allen kind of comedy. There's farce, physical comedy. Like Stephen E, there's a lot going on over here. So we're going to get into that later. But getting back on track, this one was written by Mark Bucina, Mikey's brother. And basically, Chad Verdi's really great at kind of looking at the chessboard and seeing how all those pieces can kind of move together. And Chad immediately saw comedy and said, well, we should try to get this in the hands of Jonathan Silverman, who Jonathan Silverman had just worked with Chad on Self-Storage and had worked with him on some other kind of projects, and they had been chatting, and Chad had a relationship with his representation. So this script was put in front of him, and by him, I mean Jonathan Silverman. And Jonathan Silverman not only loved it, but was like, yeah, this is kind of great. I'm looking to direct something with my wife. Him and his wife, Jennifer Finnigan, who is a longtime actress. Jennifer's done everything from won a daytime Emmy to she's been on several TV shows like Close to Home, Better with You, Tyrant. So she's very much a veteran working actor. And at the time, I think they had only been married for a few years, and this was just something that they wanted to do together. And it moved pretty quickly. And it was one of those things where they had to call in a lot of favors. This movie certainly had a bigger budget than like an Army of the Damned, but it still had a moderate budget. It wasn't anything crazy. It wasn't one of those things where you were going to be able to pay millions of dollars to bring in stars. So they reached out to a lot of their friends, and that's why you get this kind of really eclectic cast. I mean, out of all the casts that Chad has put together in the past, this one has the most kind of interesting crayons in the crayon box in terms of comedy and humor and just overall funny people.
Well, you got Kenan. Was it Kenan Thompson, right, from SNL? He's
We
in
do
this.
we do have Kenan Thompson. We're just gonna kind of why don't we just run down the cast a little bit, Mike. Geoff Stults was the lead in this movie. Geoff is a very funny guy. One of those guys who really understands his personality. And not to say that he's not acting, because he certainly is. It's not easy to be yourself on camera, but Geoff is just a very funny person to begin with. He's got this great sense of humor. Um, Very tall, kind of has this physical presence. You know, he's one of those 6'4" kind of guys, just a big dude. He might even be 6'5". He's a monster in terms of height. But yeah, he's just one of these big guys who really kind of knows how to operate his personality, and he's got this kind of suave nature to him, but he can also be kind of self-aware and goofy, and I mean that in a playful way. You know, some like really handsome dudes that kind of have all their shit together aren't always good at making light of themselves as well. And
Sure.
Geoff can do it both. As they say, get you a guy that can do it both. Well, he can. You know, Geoff can play the really cool, sexy dude, or he can, have a laugh at himself. And I think that kind of a range is what made him so great in this part, and what's continued to serve him well as he's had a really terrific career. But Geoff's a cool guy, man. There's a quick backstory. We've heard these kind of stories before, but Geoff and his brother George were literally like picked out of a mall in their hometown in the Midwest somewhere by like a mall scout. Like, remember back in the 90s, like kids that are watching this, if you're under the age of, 20, 25, you probably don't know this. But long before social media, when model agencies were looking for people, they would actually send model talents out to random fucking malls throughout the United States to look for attractive young people and
Right.
go up to them and say, "Hi, I'm so and so with model whatever club. Do you want to take some headshots?" Now, 90% of the time, it was probably some kind of scam
Right.
where, you'd pay money and you'd have to pay $300 and you'd take some pictures and then they'd send you the pictures and then you never get anything out of it. But once in a while, these were legitimate talent scouts that had nowhere else to look. Again, we're not talking about an era where you can go online and just scroll through a catalog of thousands of actors. You have to literally hit the mall pavement and walk the fucking mall and find the beautiful people of the day and approach him and say, "Hey, I think you've got a great look. You should be a model." Now, listen, it sounds like the sleaziest job in the fucking world. Can you even imagine? Like, by today's standards, like going up to
Right.
a group of people and be like, "Hey, you got a great look, kid. Take my
Yeah.
number. Give me a call." I mean, it's definitely one of those kind of, by today's standards, it seems really creepy. But back in the, 90s, this is something that would be very, very happening all the time.
We call them talent scouts, I believe, right?
Yep.
And there's a lot of cases of Guess Jeans models, Anna Nicole Smith, or there's one in particular I'm thinking of. She was a blonde bombshell that was discovered by scouts. So it was an accepted practice. It, like you said, uh, just same the thing with comedy, how the flavor of comedy can change. I mean, we're talking about the 2013 era. I want to say that things like Seth Rogen and Judd Apatow, I want to say that those type of things, Super Bad, The Hangover, those were kind of like the big things around the time of The Opposite Sex or A Bet's a Bet.
Yeah, that was the flavor of comedy at the time. It was a little bit after that, like, American Pie kinda zone,
Right.
um, but, still very much in that kinda Seth Rogen type, ilk of comedy. So playing opposite Jeff, we had Mena Suvari, who everybody knows Mena Suvari from American Beauty, uh,
And American Pie.
and American Pie. How about that? That's a good point. We
Yeah.
just we were just talking about American Pie.
Right.
So Mena Suvari was, kind of like the it actor, one of those it young actors of the, I would say, like late 90s, early 2000s. Very, very talented. And this was, she'd played a lot of, obviously, like high school, college type roles. This was a cool role for her because she just got to play, kind of an adult. She wasn't a kid in high school. She wasn't in college. She wasn't some young hipster. She was just like a, businesswoman, and kind of about to prove this man, Geoff Stults' character, that he has certainly met his match. Mena, also kind of a fun fact, we shot this movie in Rhode Island, and Mena lived in Rhode Island up until she was 12 years old. So she had a little Rhode Island connection there. You know, she grew up in Newport, which is, if you're not from Rhode Island, that's like a beautiful town right on the water. So Mena got to kind of come back home for this one. And she was great. You know, it was fun to work with her. Again, you know, once in a while you get a chance to work with someone that you've seen in massive movies. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, both American Pie and American Beauty were huge movies for different reasons. You know, American Pie kind of shaped the pop culture of late 90s, early 2000s kids for a little while. You know, I mean, I remember watching that movie in the theater with my best buddy when I was probably a freshman in high school, and just like feeling a little bit more grown up just by watching it. You know, I felt a little bit more like a little cooler just by watching it. Like, oh wow, hey, you know what? These next few years going into high school, if it's anything like this, it's gonna be a pretty fucking good time. So I remember American Pie being kind of a special one, and I probably didn't appreciate American Beauty until I was a little bit older. But that's
Right.
another terrific film.
Yeah, she was great. Those movies were iconic. So I mean, it was a big score to get her for this project. And like you said, it's a good opportunity for her to reconnect with Rhode Island, and also just to play a character that's not, in that 16-year-old range. I'm sure she was a little bit older, for instance, when she did American Beauty. Uh, Talk about how things change, buddy. That type of movie, or I mean, not to say that type of movie, but that movie would have a hard time getting made these days with some of the storylines in it, and especially, with Kevin Spacey. Uh, he had an unfortunate downturn in his life and career since. So it's just amazing how, in the blink of an eye, so many things can change in the entertainment world.
Yeah, it really is. You know, 10, 15 years in movie years, it might as well be 100 years. It's really
Right.
funny how that kind of works. Um, Moving it along, you know, we just talked about that kind of era of comedy, that late 90s, early 2000s. Well, we had Deborah Jo Rupp in this one. And Deborah Jo Rupp plays the mom on that 70s show. So that might make everyone go, oh, okay. Because she's just hilarious. And she played this really quirky secretary character. And I remember she came in for one day. She was in New York doing something, I believe on Broadway or off Broadway. She was doing some kind of play. And she came in on the train, shot her scenes. I remember her asking Jonathan and Jennifer, hey, like, can I play with an accent? Can I like do an accent? And they were like, yeah, okay. So she came up with this fun character. You know, a lot of times, and this is actually I've experienced this, when you bring somebody in to just play like a one day role, like sometimes they're gonna want to like put a little panache on it and do something a little different, whether it's whether it's an accent, whether it's some kind of a limp, a physical thing that they do. You know, for an actor that's gonna come in for one day and just play like one character that's only in a handful of scenes, you know, something to think about. You know, what can you do as an actor to come in just for that one scene and make it just a little bit more memorable, whether it's, oh, you know, that she had a cool accent, she walked kind of funny, she had something, you know, there was something maybe she wore something that was kind of memorable. Remember, as actors, we're always trying to make yourself memorable. You don't want to be trying to steal the show every scene, but you want to be memorable and you want to be unique, and you want people to, when they go home that night after watching the movie, or when they shut the movie off and they're eyes closed and are thinking about the film back, they're like, "Oh man, that character was funny." You know, I remember something. I like that character. There's something about them that I like. Um, so that's something that, you know, again, like for me, the big part of this one was just learning from all these actors that we're talking about. We had Eric Roberts on the set. You
Yeah.
know, Eric at the time, and still to this day, is very close with Chad Verdi. But this was a case for, you know, Chad to really just reach out to Eric and offer him an opportunity and have him come in. I think Eric was only here for a couple days. And this one was fun for me. Maybe I should pause and kind of say like how I fit in
Sure.
in this whole deal. I kind of forgot to say that. Um, so I was into this from the beginning, in the sense where I was probably one of the first people to read the script when Gino brought it to the table and kind of showed it to Chad, and, you know, said that he wanted to really make this movie. And And then Chad utilized a lot of his resources to make it happen and put it together. At the time, I was directing a couple movies for Chad, and I came on early on as an executive producer. And, the term executive producer is kind of funny because I think it's one of those really like kind of bold out there terms that's also very vague. People hear
Right.
it, they hear executive producer, sounds like, wow, that's a big deal. Executive. You picture a bunch of people wearing wing-tipped shoes and three-piece suits sitting around a fucking mahogany coffee table talking about millions of dollars. We're
Right.
executive producers. Well, there's a lot of ways to get an executive producer credit. You can attach talent to a project. You can make a couple phone calls. You can attach more producers. You can bring in financing. You could point someone in the direction of financing. You can lock a location. You can simply help out in terms of look at the budget and maybe modify some things and consult a little bit and make the film kind of become suddenly a little bit more producible. Well, now you're an executive producer. You can make a phone call that brings a large piece of talent. Now you're an executive producer. There's so many different ways to do it. For me, it was one of those things where, all right, I was useful because I had just made, a couple movies in the same geographical space that we were going to make a bet's a bet. Uh, I obviously wasn't going to direct the movie. That was Jonathan Silverman's job. That was Jennifer Finnigan's job. But Chad knew that I could come in and basically assist in a way and
Right.
kind of, point the fingers in the right directions to acquiring some great local talent, acquiring locations. I didn't do a ton of creative work on the script. That wasn't really my place on this one. But, definitely was just there to be a set of helping hands. And that I ended up kind of getting more than I bargained for, which we'll talk about after we get through this cast. But then in the process of it, I read the script and there was this character named Reno that I kind of fell in love with. And again, this is one of those cases where you can backdoor your way in as an actor. I'd like to think that, had I just like cold called Johnny Silverman and said, here's my headshot. Can I read for this part? I'll be honest, I probably wouldn't have got the part. But the fact that I was hanging around Jonathan Silverman and hanging around Jennifer Finnigan, and they kind of knew who I was in terms of like my personality, they knew kind of my sense of humor. When it came time to talk about me playing the role of Reno, it made a little bit more sense than just had I been some guy off the street, because I'd already been working with Silverman for a little while, kind of, being part of this team and putting the pieces together. I think Jennifer was a little suspect of me playing the part.
Okay.
But I think Jonathan believed in me, because you got to keep in mind too, like, not to date myself a little bit. But I was, I think, like, 29, 28, 29 when I worked on this movie. And all the guys that were playing, like, my buddies, the character's buddy that I tried to play, they were all in their late 30s, early 40s. So I was a little, in hindsight, I was probably too young for the part. It was probably one of those things where like, oh, why would this guy be hanging out with these guys? But in any case, it worked out. So we'll get into a little bit more of that and how I fit in. But again, for the actors out there, that just goes to show you, this should never be your first intent. You should try as hard as you can. Like, I was working as hard as I could as an executive producer, which opened up the opportunity to be in the film. So if you're trying to backdoor it, it's okay to try to backdoor it, but just remember, you still gotta do your job on the front door part of the deal. You got to hold up your end. You can't just be trying to be like a sheep, or what is it, a wolf in lamb's clothing, an
Right.
an actor in production's clothing. You don't want to be that, but you might just be able to work your way into some opportunities.
Well, I
Um,
wanted to say, Tommy, for the viewers, a lot of, I've been an acting coach, and a lot of people always want to know, how do I get involved? How do I get parts? And like like you're saying, sometimes if you're a valuable contributor to the production of a film or a TV show or a web series or a short film, if you're someone that can write, if you're someone that can make phone calls, get a location, that's always tough for some people. Is if like for me, I was always pretty good at getting coffee houses or whatever for locations. If you can contribute to production in ways different than just look at me, I'm the actor, put me on screen, you're going to be more valuable to have around. And a lot of this stuff with the film industry is based on trust and likability. You know, it's not just who's actors. I mean, I don't want to go a bit of a rant, but sometimes actors have a false sense of importance. You know, there's a good theater lesson that I learned early on in dinner theater. Another ass will fill your seat. So if you can kind of contribute in ways such as yourself as producing or what have you, then you're going to be putting yourself in a better position to get roles through relationships and not just depending on that phone to ring, which never seems to.
Yeah, exactly, Mike. Or depending on the audition, where we all get nervous belly, and all this opportunity is riding on this 30-second audition. It's like it removes a lot of that pressure. Um, but yeah, back to the cast. So, we talked about Eric Roberts. This was a fun one. He was only in here for a day. Uh, cool piece of Eric Roberts trivia. I got to go to the gym with him a couple times, and it's funny to see like people react to Eric Roberts in the gym. He does get a lot of attention. You'd be shocked how many people are doing some tricep extensions and look over and are like, they'll come up to me and be like, "Is that Eric Roberts?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's him. He's getting a little workout in." But he's very gracious and was very cool. And anybody who asked him for a picture or anything like that, he didn't mind doing it. So as we continue down the list here, we had Joey Fatone in the movie. Now, Joey Fatone was coming off of a movie called Incubus, which was actually Verdi Productions' very first film. You can go back in the archives and take a look at our Incubus episode to hear all about it. And that starred Robert Englund, of course, aka Freddy Krueger. Joey Fatone is a naturally very, very funny guy. If you were to just sit down and have a coffee with him, he'd be getting you laughing pretty much the whole time. Great sense of humor, and it's an aware sense of humor. It's a smart sense of humor. So it made sense for him to come in. And again, this was a situation where Joey came in. I think he worked one day. He might have worked a day and like hung out for a day where we like went out and had like a nice dinner. But for the most part, he was in and out of Rhode Island in 48 hours. And he played this really quirky character. It was kind of a fun character. He played a weird delivery man who like opens up the packages before he drops them off and like spies on what everybody's getting, which is kind of it's a little bit of a creepy character, but in like that kind of comedic creepy way. Uh, Now we talked about, of course, the directors Jennifer Finnigan and Jonathan Silverman. Of course, they had parts in the movie as well. It'd be crazy to have that talent sitting on the bench. So they went on in and played small parts. I think Jonathan Silverman worked for like a day, and Jennifer's part was probably only a couple, 2-3 days. But they lent their talent to the film. Kristen Chenoweth was really cool to have in. She's one of these like just super talents that's obviously, done so many things from film to television to theater, and just a if this were baseball, they'd say that's a five-tool player. Can hit for power, average, steal bases, field, run the bases, can do a little bit of everything. And I remember when Kristen Chenoweth was on set, it was a big deal. It was like one of those things where like the proverbial red carpet was rolled out, and she was treated like the star that she is and she deserves to be. But the funny thing is, she was so down to earth. Like she was almost like, "Oh, this is really great. You didn't have to do this. You really didn't have to. Just super." The word that comes to mind is just like incredible, like class. Just a
Right.
total class act, and gracious and just really awesome to work with. And then Dana Ashbrook, if you're a Twin Peaks fan, we talked about timing. It's kind of funny because when Dana Ashbrook was on the set, again, one day he came in to play like one part, and Twin Peaks had been kind of like just the pulse had left the show. I mean, people who love the show, but nobody was really talking about Twin Peaks in 2013. And then cut to, whatever it is, 10 years later, they ended up reviving the show and doing another season. So it's kind of funny, like, again, not that you're ever going to like finance an entire movie off the back of one actor like Dana Ashbrook, no offense. But it's funny that like at the time, like who knows, like maybe he wouldn't have done it a few years later when that Twin Peaks show came out. Like maybe he would have been just, and I don't mean like, oh, I'm too big for it. He might have just been busy. You know, he might have
Right.
been legit just working on that show. Or doing a lot of conventions. You know, you never know. Maria Kanellis was in this film to bring it around with some wrestling. And Maria was like really funny in this movie. Again, small part for Maria, but if you go back and watch this one, I think that this might be like one of Maria Kanellis's like best film roles. She plays the lead character, Geoff Stults, is like, you know, one night stand type hookup. And sort of like this is a very common thread in a lot of these romantic comedies, but she plays the girl that almost fucks everything up for the lead guy, you know, at the end of the movie. Like the one that there's always that scene in every romantic comedy where the leading lady walks in on the leading guy who's either almost about to hook up with someone else or is hooking up with someone else, or it looks like they're about to hook up and then she leaves and he's got to explain himself. So yeah, we've seen it
The,
1,000 fucking times.
the
Um,
ex-girlfriend comes back for a little shot in the arm of let's get back together, and she's kissing the lead guy or whatever, and he's trying to fend her off, and then the new love interest star of the movie comes back in and gets upset. Gotcha.
or sometimes it's the old accidental where like there wasn't even anything shady going on, but it just looks bad. And now how am
Right.
I going to explain this kind of a thing? So that's the character that Maria played, and she was terrific in it. And I remember after that movie, and shout out to Maria. It's a shame that we haven't done anything together recently because I think that she is a super talented actor. And I remember after watching this part, seeing her and saying like, man, like I would love to do like something where Maria's the lead, you know, and like really like give her some like a big opportunity to like do a lot more than just because again, I think she worked for a day, maybe two. So it's kind of fun when you see like what somebody can do with a very small part. You start thinking like, oh man, this would be could be a cool equation here if we give her more to do. So maybe someday we'll get, you know, something with a little more substance and work with Maria again. Again, we had talked about how, you know, Army of the Damned was literally like 2 months before this. So we had a lot of Army of the Damned actors in it. You know, Jackie Moore came in and played a really cool little cameo, and she was our leading lady in Army of the Damned. Tommy Dreamer came in, and this was only Tommy Dreamer's second movie with us, but Tommy would go on to do, you know, probably I think Tommy Dreamer's been in maybe 7 or 8 films that we've done, and this was just the second. So this was kind of like the start of the streak, if you will. David Gear, we've talked about him a lot on the show. He was a big part of not only being in the, you know, he was in the film and had a little cameo, but he was a big part of helping cast the movie. This movie, again, when you watch it, it's got a lot of production value. It seems big in the sense that a lot of scenes with a lot of actors, and a lot of that was David Gear putting together a bunch of people to come in and do the movie. Nick Principe, we talked about again, Army of the Damned. Nick Principe was one of the stars of Army of the Damned, and very much, if this were football, he was a team captain in terms of, you know, his importance on that set. So he had a cameo. Fred Sullivan had a cameo. We'll talk about him a lot on movies like the Almost Mercy podcast, but Fred and I have collaborated a bunch of times. He was in this. And of course, the last actor of note, Danielle Goulden, who had again, just a small 1-day part in this. But this was like kind of like one of the first times we got to really chatting. And she would go on to star in Almost Mercy. And, you know, we really hit it off. And I still to this day think she's one of the most talented actors I've worked with in a film. So it was really cool to, again, you know, just start a lot of those relationships. You know, this movie wasn't, as I think back on this movie and I try to reminisce, it's funny, there weren't dozens and dozens of stories of production that came to mind. And, oh, remember this night, and remember the time that happened. There wasn't as much of that. It was really what I remembered the most about this one was the people. Because a lot of these people, not only, you know, do they mean a lot to me now, and they've kind of went on to do a bunch of movies, but they've become really great friends. But at the time, I wasn't really that close with a lot of them, so it's kind
Sure.
of fun to think back and say, oh, wow, we were just kind of just becoming pals at this time.
Casual acquaintances become collaborators, become friends. That's always good.
Yeah, now we'll talk a little bit more about the production. It's a quick side note, what I remember. Do you remember Vine videos? They were those like 10, 12-second videos. It was like
Very vaguely, I
TikTok.
remember getting an email at the time from Vine, believe it or not, that they must have seen some of my YouTube videos even back then or something, and they're like, "Hey, we want you to be a contributor to Vine." And I'm looking at it like 10 to 12 seconds, and I really just put it aside and didn't do anything with it. And then a couple of years later, it was the big thing for a cup of coffee.
Yeah, it's funny. Vine was really hot for a minute. Now it's no longer a thing. But if you think about it, the Vine was really hot at the time. And I just
Right.
remember myself, Nick Principe, and John Del Ponte, who was the production designer on this film. Um, or actually, he was my personal production designer on a lot of my films that I worked with. I don't know exactly what he did on this movie. I think he was a producer on this one. Or maybe he was the art director. Doesn't matter. We were Vine fucking crazy at the time. And all we did was go around making Vine videos and trying to kind of like outdo each other with the level of uh, absolute fucking ridiculousness that we could put together in our Vine videos. But I remember that being like a little thing on set during this movie. It was like the movie within the movie was me, John, and Nick just going around doing really ridiculous nonsense and putting it on Vine. So yeah, John Del Ponte was a big part of this movie. He's again one of those guys that we talk about a lot in my kind of early part of my career, and he's a guy that you talk about unsung heroes of the production.
Sure.
John did a lot for these movies early on. Um, but yeah, so basically, talk a little bit about locations. We filmed in Rhode Island. Anybody knows Rhode Island? We know it's the smallest state, so we're able to kind of get around and do a lot and utilize a lot of locations. We could be at a beach, we can be in the city, we can be in a rural area. We got all that shit going on right in Rhode Island. But at the time, we filmed at this place called Mardi Gras, which is a multi club. If you don't know what a multi club is, it's probably good because there's no good things happen at these nefarious places. No, I'm just kidding. This place wasn't too bad, but it was a multi club. It was kind of a weird concept. It's kind of a dated concept of like the 80s and 90s, where you'd have this one facility, and within this one nightclub, you'd actually have multiple, hence the name multi nightclub. So
Right.
you'd walk in the door, you'd have like a rodeo hoedown sawdust joint to the right.
Yeah.
You'd go to the left and you'd have a Bourbon Street rock and roll bar where it like looks like, you'd have a rock band playing and you're suddenly in Louisiana.
You'd
Then
have
you go up.
your Dirty Deeds AC/DC tribute band on the left and your line dancing competition on the right. And if you went upstairs, you might have your mini rave or something to that effect.
Yeah, upstairs was the hip hop slash rave room where you'd have like, either hip hop music or techno music. And right in the middle, which this was personally my favorite. Actually, no, there were two other clubs. This was a fucking nutty place. In the middle, you had like a Jimmy Buffett style, like island tiki bar kind of
Right.
club. And in the very back, you had a Saturday Night Fever like disco in the back. So
Yeah.
you walk in, you get the rodeo joint to the right, you get the rock and roll Bourbon Street bar to the left, you got fucking Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville ripoff in the middle, you've got the fucking disco in the back, and upstairs you're in a goddamn rave. So this was Mardi Gras multi club, and let me tell you, it was a happening place. If those walls could talk, they can't talk anymore because they knocked the fucking place down about a year ago. But if they could, they'd tell some stories. So we kind of had run of this place. This was our location, and probably like I think this was a 15-day shoot. I want to say that we shot at this place for probably 7 or 8 of those days. Half the shoot. So we became very much residents of the multi club. It's funny, man. I don't know if you've ever been to a nightclub in the daytime, but it's always like this weird thing. You see things that place just suddenly isn't as sexy in the daytime. Let's just put it that way. But we had a lot of fun. And then, I mentioned I'm an executive producer. Part of that was Army of the Damned. We had shot at my parents' house. And I kind of told them that would never happen again. They would never have to worry about that ever again. And then, I'm really trying to do my job as an executive producer, and I'm trying to make Jonathan Silverman and Jen Finnigan happy. They're the directors. That's my job. I'm trying to facilitate. Also, they've graciously granted me the right to play this part, Reno. So I just want to be a good boy, man. And I just want to lock this fucking location. They were having a really hard time finding, again, it's not so much like, oh, we couldn't find a house, but it's like finding a house that has all the right things, all the right rooms, has the right look. We can convert it a certain way. There's a level of controllability, and the price is right, meaning it's fucking free, Mike.
Yeah.
So I agreed to ask my parents, and I convinced them. And sure enough, we shot, I want to say, 4 days at my parents' house. And they were very cool. My parents have a beach house, and at the time they took off to the beach house and hunkered down there. I was like, you guys don't want to be here for this, trust me. You should just leave, lay low for a few days. And filming at the house was kind of fun. It was interesting. We probably again, we talked about this a little bit on the Army of the Damned episode, but this was still when I was in my 20s, and myself and Del Ponte and Principe, we were a little younger, more unruly, maybe a little immature. There is kind of a funny story when, we were living at my house, and that was also the set. And we might have been overserved one night at the bar, and we might have come back and still been a little bit out of our minds, a little out of sorts. And we ended up putting TV on. Now the living room where it was my living room, is where I grew up. It's where we're all hanging out. It's where the TV is, right? You always congregate where the TV is. So at home, we get home, we're all fired up. We put the TV on. John's trying to be respectful. Guys, this is a hot set. There's literally signs that say hot set, do not touch. But of course, I got to get in the fridge. I got to get some food. I got to eat something. We've been drinking all night. So, we end up watching a little TV on the hot set, being mindful of all of our crumbs, cleaning everything up as we go. We don't want to fuck anything up. We're not moving any furniture. We're just being very careful. We're sitting on the couch. We're going to just watch a little TV. We're going to snack up a little bit. And then we're going to go to bed. And we had an early call time. I want to say it was a 6 a.m. call time. So we knew that at 6 a.m., people were going to be arriving to set. Not just any people, crew people, actors, Mena Suvari. So equipment, gear, everything. So 6 a.m. comes, and we're woken up by the first AD, one of the PAs, and actually Mena Suvari, who's entering, keep in mind, they had the garage door to my house. They had the codes. They had the keys. So they were able to get in. And they walk in on me, Nick Principe, and John Del Ponte, literally passed out on the hot set in various degrees of weird body positions. We're not supposed to be there. It's supposed to be completely free of everyone. It's everything's already been established. And there we are, passed out. So it was kind of funny. Mena was like, "Good morning, boys." And we were like, "Okay, good morning, Mena. Can I get you anything?" It was fun. Listen, we probably should have been a little smarter about it, but we didn't get anything messed up. Nothing got messed up. Nothing was banged up, but it was just kind of funny to pass out on set. And the nice thing was we certainly were not late. We weren't late to this one. But I think overall, this movie had a really good look to it. Part of that was Gendra Jarnigan was the director of photography, and she came in and very great eye. She's also a Rhode Islander, but was living in New York at the time. Um, and she put together a really cool kind of cinematic strategy for this film. And it very much did look like it was a love letter to one of those, like I said, those late 90s, early 2000s romantic comedies that, I think that we all kind of it feels like home cooking, it's like it's very she put together a very digestible palette in terms of the colors of this film and the look and how it's all kind of put together. And the movie certainly has a lot of production value. As far as where the movie maybe fell short a little bit, again, I think it all goes back to comedy and just how difficult comedy is. And I feel like this script was a little too safe and careful at times, and it wasn't quite sure what it wanted to be. Remember, and Steve had brought this up, but it's a great point. Comedy is such a vast and broad topic, subject, genre, whatever you want to call it. There are so many different styles of comedy, and I think that this movie wasn't sure if it wanted to be like a National Lampoon's style, 80s raunchy comedy where they kind of push the envelope. Again, to use the American Pie reference, like, or even to use the Farley brothers of the late 90s, early 2000s, where like they really push the envelope. They don't cut away when you think you should cut away, and they end up showing something a little extreme, and it's funny. Um, so again, this movie didn't quite go that far with it. It's
Right.
almost like it would take a joke up to the line, but it wouldn't cross the line. And in comedy, you got to cross the line. That's the whole thing. That's the whole point of comedy. I mean, obviously, we don't want to offend people, but you can't play comedy safe. And I think that, that was one of the shortfalls here. The script was just a little too safe. And I get it. I'm not trying to dunk on anyone. It's not an easy thing to do because it's also a romantic comedy and you're trying to make it presentable to certain audiences, again, um, certain advertisers. That's the other thing that we think about when we're like, oh, how come that movie was safe? Well, it's playing it safe because it wanted to make sure that it could be attractive to certain types of advertisers. If this movie's played on TV, who's going to want their name attached to that? We don't want it to be too crazy. But again, I think it could have just pushed it a little harder. I think
Sounds
that
like
that
it kind of fell into the dramedy. Is that what they call a mix of a comedy and a drama? A dramedy. It fell into that sphere, Tommy, which can be. It's like that expression. It's not fish or fowl. It's not a full-on comedy, and it's not a full-on drama. And I think when we talked about this at another time, it almost had like a feeling of a Woody Allen late 70s, 80s relationship bickering, like the relationship comedy. And it's trying to do too many things at once so that it doesn't do anything particularly well, if that's just a general thought.
Yeah, it is. It's we've used this term a lot in writing in the past, and if you're a creative person out there and you're looking to write some scripts, I think this script might have mixed mojos a little bit,
Right.
where, okay, we're gonna try to do some physical comedy. Okay, we're gonna try to do some push the envelope and don't cut away when you should cut away because it's funny. Okay, we're gonna do some fun Woody Allen style banter. But the reality is it never focused on just any one thing. And here's the deal. If you're paying money for a comedy, if you're actually going to plank down your hard-earned money, you want more than a handful of strategically placed smirks. You want belly splitting, laugh out loud kind of comedy. I mean, that's what you're fucking paying for. So I think that again, it just gets back to really difficult to do comedy. It's probably one of the reasons why uh, you don't see a lot of independent production companies putting out a lot of comedies because again, it's not easy to do, requires an incredible script. And then even if you have the best fucking comedy that you think domestically is goddamn hilarious, you might try to sell it to Japan and they might be like this when they watch it.
Oh yeah.
Like it might just not hit at all. Or Germany, they might watch it in Germany and just be like, so the comedy that's funny here in America just might not translate overseas and in the foreign markets. So it
Right.
ain't an easy genre, buddy.
Well, as opposed to say a horror film where, you can make a horror film and you got some creepy, killer, you got some possessed child, like I watched Orphan, the first one last night, and that movie could play anywhere because you've got a possessed child and that's scary no matter what your country. But if you're talking about cultural nuances of comedy, is Jack Black or Seth Rogen or whoever going to translate to all these different languages and cultures? Probably not.
And that is why comedy is never easy. Let's talk a little bit about the wrap up on this one. Again, great looking film. It was one of these things where we were able to have an awesome premiere. Chad Verdi and Michelle Verdi hosted a terrific event, I believe in East Greenwich, Rhode Island. And it was a great event, and it was a great chance for movies like this. Again, we had said that there were a lot of background actors in this movie, and a lot of people from Rhode Island kind of got involved and were in this one. And there's a lot of fun cameos. And if you watch this one and you're a fan of the show, you'll see cameos of a lot of John Del Ponte makes a cameo. David Gears in this one. Chad Verdi Jr. Was, I think, maybe 16, 17 years old when we did this film. And he's in the movie and he worked on it. And, now we work with him a lot. So it's fun to see all these kind of fun cameos and almost like Easter eggs. And that premiere was great because it was a chance for all these Rhode Islanders and New Englanders, some people from Mass, some people from Connecticut, to come in and watch their work. And Mike, you had a little something to do with that event. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your night at the premiere?
Yeah, subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. Some of the more fun videos on the channel are from the premiere night where I interviewed yourself, David Gear, the director of photography, Gendra Jardigan, as you said. She has a really nice interview that I have up there. And I think it was my friend Chris Boylston provided the camera work. For the time, it was something called Messier Moment, which was in this David Gear inspired Industry Insiders Facebook group. And who else did I think I interviewed Chad, Chad Verdi Sr. I interviewed him, and Jonathan Silverman, the co-director. And of course, he was very gracious to put over his wife. And I think I even interviewed Vinny Pazienza, who at the time was excited because you guys were about to go into production for Bleed for this. So I guess that's 5 or 6 interviews I did on the red carpet, so to speak. And yeah, if people just go to my it's literally called subscribe to Mike Messier YouTube channel. Put Mike Messier, Tommy DiNucci, or Mike Messier, Jonathan Silverman, or Mike Messier, Vinny Paz. All those interviews will pop up in the search on YouTube. And it was
Right
really
here,
fun.
we've got Kim Kaling saying that, Mike, you're such a great interviewer.
Thanks, Kim. And then I think we actually, if I could, I have a pretty good memory for some of this stuff, Tommy. I think the after party that night was actually at the aforementioned Club Mardi Gras. So for me, that was a fun after party. And, it's kind of sad, buddy, and I'm sure everybody goes through this, but there's things that you might take for granted, in your existence. And a Club Mardi Gras, granted, it was a little bit over the top with these 5 different clubs, but it was kind of nice to know that a place was there, right there in the Cranston/Warwick area of Rhode Island, where if you wanted to go out and have a fun time, it was kind of like a one-stop shop. You could just go to a place like that, and there's something going on you'd probably like. So it's. I
Yeah,
hope that.
it was nice. It was nice for us to have an opportunity to kind of celebrate the place that we shot the movie at after.
Yeah.
It's always nice when you can do that and you can kind of return back to the location, have a couple drinks, and take part in some fellowship. But yeah, overall for me, my take home from this was just, it was great to be on a comedy set, learn what works, learn what doesn't work. And like we said earlier, being around all these different actors. I mean, those actors, when we went through that list, how many different styles of actors, how many different backgrounds and genres. It was like a, mixed martial arts of acting. It was mixed martial acting. It was all these different backgrounds and styles coming together. So I really enjoyed watching that. And at the end of the day, it was nice to kind of get my just due from Jonathan Silverman and Jennifer Finnigan. And, they think that they were, at the end of the day, happy that I played the part of Reno. and we had a fun time. And Kenan Thompson, can we just stop? And I think we forgot to really talk about like what an
Yeah, I was
awesome
about to ask you because I believe, Tommy, a little factoid. Kenan Thompson has the record for most consecutive seasons as a SNL cast member, lead cast member. I believe
he
he's on
does.
20 seasons. I mean, that's more than anybody, more than Bill Murray, more than Eddie Murphy, Dan Aykroyd, Jane uh, uh, Curtin, uh,
Yeah,
Julie Louise Dreyfus.
Kenan
Wow, he
Thompson.
blew it all away.
Kenan Thompson's a legend in his own time. He really is. We talked about people that are just funny and that people expect them to be funny. He's one of those guys where he doesn't have to do a whole lot to get a laugh. He's kind of just established his brand of humor so much so that he can do the most subtle things. And as far as just like what kind of dude he is, what kind of guy, very down to earth, very gracious. He actually came over my house and like hung out with us one night, like me and my buddies, like me, Del Ponte, Principe. We had shot with him during the day, and it was funny. Like I'm an executive producer, so obviously I'm there to like make sure that like he's taken care of and comfortable. And I remember I was like, "Hey, can we get you anything to eat? Like, what can I get you, man? Like, get you anything? Send someone on a run." Because he had said that he was a little hungry or whatever, and it was probably a few hours until lunch. And I was like, "Whatever you need, brother. Like, I'll send somebody out right now." Um, and he just goes, "You know what I'd really love?" I was like, "What? Anything?" He goes, "I'd love some McDonald's right now." He's like, "Do you guys want McDonald's?" And I was like, I mean, yeah. I mean, I was at the time I was like lifting a lot of weights and just eating everything in sight, just trying to get as big as I could. So I was like, yeah, I would totally go for some McDonald's right now. He's like, I'll get you some McDonald's. I was like, no, no, I want to get you. He's like, no, no, no. You want anything? What do you guys want? What do you guys want? He takes out some cash and he sends a PA in to go get, a round of Big Macs for everybody. Uh, Refused to let me pay for it. Like wanted to take care of it. Said, no, it's my idea. I'm happy to like I said, refused to take my money. And we had little friendship over some fries. And then that night, we dropped him off at his hotel, and every night we would just hang out at my house and listen to some music, talk about the day. Uh, and basically, I was just like, "Hey, man, we're gonna be hanging out at my house later on if you want to come by." Not thinking he'd say yes. But, like, I wanted to invite him, and, he was like, "Yeah, man, you know what? I'm just sitting in that fucking hotel room all night long." Like, I think he wrapped early, like, he wrapped at, like, 6 or 7 o'clock. So it's like, am I gonna sit in my hotel room from 6 p.m. on, or am I gonna
Right.
go hang out with some guys? So, uh, we picked him up, brought him to my house, and we had a really fun night just, like, kinda kicking it with Kenan on the porch. So we're
Sounds like a new show,
we're
a new sitcom.
we're broadcasting live here from the porch, and it's nice to know that Kenan has been on the porch and taken part in a little bit of fellowship with us. So Kenan was awesome. Out of everybody on this movie set, aside from Geoff Stults and I are probably, yeah, I guess you could say we're low key friends. Meaning like we don't hang out all the time or anything like that. But if I was in LA and I shot Jeff a text and said, "Hey, do you want to get a drink?" He'd meet me for a drink and we'd have some fun. So out of all the people in this movie, Kenan probably vibe with me the most, Kenan and Jeff. So great to work with those guys. Uh, Really, at the end of the day, this was just kind of like this was an easy one for me. To be
Right.
honest with you, we never really like to. Nothing's easy. Every fucking movie you make is a challenge. But for me, it was like a home game. I was working as an executive producer. I acted in the movie for literally just 2 days. They shot all my scenes out in 2 days. And for the most part, I was kind of in coast mode. So like I look back on this one, uh, again, I don't have any of those major stories of anything. Oh, that was so crazy. But the feel overall is just kind of pleasant. It was just like a pleasant experience for me. Um, and at the end of the day, I think if you check it out, you'll find out that it's a pleasant and digestible film as well. But Mike, I'm getting into something pretty intense this week myself. This whole week, I've been prepping a music video. I am shooting a music video on Friday. I'm excited. I'm a little nervous. Uh, Not in like I got bugs crawling on me kind of nervous, but the truth is I haven't directed anything since Johnny and Clyde, and that was
Right.
back in October. So again, guys, we talk about this on the show in the past. Like directing's not like hitting balls at the golfing range. I'm not just gonna go to the drive. I could go to the golfing range. That's not. It's a goddamn driving range, is what I was trying to say. Directing movies isn't like going to the driving range and every day I can hit a bucket of balls and like practice my swing. It's a very unusual thing to do, and it's an odd skill set. The cadence, the communication, the ability to connect with your crew, the ability to tell a story, connect with your talent. It's something that if you're not doing it all the time, you can lose those skills. So I'm very excited to be behind the camera again and be working on a music video. Shout out to Johnny Barnes. The name of the song is Let Love Go. And we're going to be shooting that all day long and all night long on Friday. One day shoot, going to bang it all out. And then we'll be cutting that up. So I'm excited to get back behind the camera, my first time in almost a year.
Yeah.
What do you got going on this week, Mike?
I'll be filming a proof of concept video in the Vero Beach area. So this is basically a proof of concept from my screenplay, stage play, novel, A Distance from Avalon, and I had a audition, set up through Breakdown Express, and did that whole process. And I think I had 45 actresses send in audition tapes, and I chose one. She's been great to work with, and my friend Tim is coming down from Rhode Island. He's literally driving down with his car full of gear, and
Wow.
he's arrived in Vero Beach, Florida already. He arrived last night, and we're going to take a couple of days of scouting out some background shots, and then we're going to set up basically a studio indoors with a green screen and shoot this proof of concept monologue on the green screen, and then insert the backgrounds.
Cool.
So different type of process that I've wanted to try for several years, and we're finally getting this going. And if there's an interest or if there's momentum, maybe 2023 we'll shoot the whole thing. But we're just doing the proof of concept this week as a kind of a trial run for the bigger picture, so to speak.
Well, good for you, Mike. And I think that's something that a lot of people watching this, if you're interested in really moving forward on an idea, there's no better way than doing it than just going out and shooting yourself a proof of concept. Again, it doesn't have to be uh, the whole concept altogether, or it doesn't have to be a lot of money you put into something. It's just got to be something that shows people like, hey, this is the kind of gist of the idea. This is the nugget of the concept. And from there, if they're any kind of creative person, they'll be able to kind of jump forward and take that leap with you. But sometimes if you can just show them a little something, you can get them excited. So I'm excited for both of us to kind of carve up some production work this week. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to my channel. That's Tom DiNucci. That's where we have this show coming out every week. We're aiming for every Tuesday, keeping it consistent. That's at Tom DiNucci. You can subscribe to Mike Messier. That's MikeMessier.com.
Yeah.
And also, here's something to think about. Just topics down the road. Give you a little heads up, just to keep it everyone on the same page to what we're doing in the next couple weeks. Next week, we're gonna dive into music videos. We're gonna be talking about music videos. I'm going to reflect a little bit about the video that I just shot. And we're going to talk about, how to break into that space. How do you even get a job shooting a music video? What can music videos do for you as an artist in terms of there's some things that you can do in a music video that you just wouldn't be able to get away with in any other kind of creative visual. And that's kind of fun. It's a very freeing space, the music video landscape. So I'm excited to not only shoot one, but shoot a video. And then next week, we're going to be talking about it. So next Tuesday, be on the lookout for another episode of An Action where we dive into music videos. And the week after that, it's going to be, I believe I'm pulling up my old calendar machine here. The week after that. So next Tuesday is the 30th. We're going to be talking music videos. And then the following Tuesday, the day after Labor Day, September 6th, we're going to be talking all about the man in the red bandana and Wells Crowther and his heroic story, and all about the documentary that was produced by Chad Verde and Matt Weiss. And I was able to work on that one with Sam Eilertson and a lot of our collaborators. So I'm going to do a little tribute to Wells Crowther, a little tribute to 9/11 and all the the victims that were lost in that tragedy.
Is
Uh,
that film available? Like, if people were to Google "Man in Red Bandana," could they watch it on Amazon Prime or Hulu, or
they sure can,
just
buddy.
because that's a movie that people may want to watch in advance of the show in 2 weeks about it. I was going to say, Tommy, you talked about we talked about websites last week, like .com, and how the prediction was that they were going to fall by the wayside, and they really didn't. Music videos have kind of been like that too for 30 years. People have been saying the music video is not as big as it was in 1984 with Madonna and Dire Straits, and that might be true, but like a .com, music videos are still relevant. Lady Gaga, I think she got a big push, and I think Beyonce, Knowles, and
Absolutely.
they all got
You know what that
pushes
is,
from
Mike?
music videos.
You know what the reason for that is? I feel
Right.
like social media has brought them back. Meaning, 10 years ago, it wasn't as easy to post a 2-minute video onto Facebook and just put it out there, or Instagram, or just have it on your phone. Nowadays, our attention spans are shit, right? So we have a hard time watching anything more than a couple minutes. Well, guess what? Music videos are only a couple minutes long. So it's like kind of perfect for the attention span that the average viewer has today. They're flashy, they're fun, there's something to look at for the most part. So yeah, that's a great point, man. Like, music videos have certainly had a little bit of a revival. So be fun to talk about that all and more next week. And yes, to answer your question, if you want to watch Man in Red Bandana in advance, you can watch that right now, streaming free with ads on Amazon Prime. So go to Amazon Prime, type in Man in Red Bandana, and I really don't think you'll be disappointed in this one. Again, Matt Weiss brought this one to the table. Chad Verdi produced it as well. And you got a voiceover by Gwyneth Paltrow, which is very, very powerful. So check that one out. It was really great to be on this little stream with Stephen E. and Kim and all of our friends that are watching along. We really appreciate the dedication every week. And we can't wait to see you next week. Tell your friends about And Action. Tell them to subscribe, and we'll see
Share the
you
link.
next week. Yeah, share that link for us too. Shout out to Kim Kaling. Really appreciate she shared our link earlier this week, and actually got us a few subscriptions. So thank you very much, Kim. We appreciate that, and we appreciate the
Thanks, Steve.
support. We'll see you next week. Bye, guys.